Right. Let us move on with the next presentation. Professor GUERY, Ebola virus and other viruses from elsewhere.
Bonjour à tous. Donc un grand.
Good afternoon, and I'd like to thank the organizers for having invited me to give this presentation about various items. It's going to be an overview. I'm not going to go into details about all the pathologies I'm going to present, but we will finish with the first word mentioned, Ebola. So this is my disclosures, no disclosure about this topic. So we'll start traveling with the first pathology, which emerged in New York, in Queens in 1999, with 2 cases of mental confusion. And on 21st of September, CDC reported that it was the St. Louis encephalitis, and there was a major eradication, a mosquito eradication campaign, and they tried to do away with it. But behind that, we had dead crows, and which means that there were 4 southern birds dead, as well as exotic birds. So this was not in line with St. Louis encephalitis. So it was the West Nile virus which was at stake. So the final result was 62 human cases and a lot of birds dead. So where did it come from? It started in Uganda, in the West Nile district, and behind that a lot of outbreaks occurred, with a major change in symptomatology, with an outbreak in Romania, with a large increase in the number of neurological types. Then it appeared on the North American continent, from the left to the right-hand side, and from top to bottom, you have the development in the number of cases on the American continent. You can see the West Nile is well established in North America, and between 2005 and 2013, we have about 2,500 cases per year. So the virus has been very successful there. So if we see the reasons why it was successful, first it's because of the vector, mosquito, the Culex type, and you have the reservoir with ducks, pigeons, etc. And then you have transmission either via horses or men, so just a few other cases. So do we have West Nile viruses in France? We had what we call the Camargue initial site, with many horses tested, with 8% positive. So knowing what happened in 1999, we tested on a wider range. You can see the number of pink flamingo that were tested, as well as ducks and other birds. Then we had seroconversion on poultry in the Gare region in 2002, and then things went down. So there was something occurring in the European continent. If you look at other countries around us, Greece, Italy, Romania, although there are still limited cases, but we can see that there is a potential and something could further develop with the West Nile virus. This is the first thing. Next, you know that there is a second thing. Nature doesn't like a vacuum, so the 1970s, you come across this pathology. So this looks like chickenpox, but it's not very far from this. What is it? It is just a monkey chickenpox. Why? Because in '83 we came to an end in our vaccination program. So 2 things occurred. The first group of cases, 233 cases in 80 to 86. It was from Congo, with very little human transmission. Then something happened. It was a major catch was in humans. So we have secondary cases, which are shown in the gray bar. But then it became a major problem in 2003 in the US with 72 cases, suspectful cases, and 37 confirmed cases. So let's look at the reservoir for all this. It's mostly with squirrels on the bottom right-hand side. And then you have all the possible reservoir animals, let's say. So then we could say that spreading, it started in April 2003 with the importation of 800 mammals from Ghana, which were imported not in a fully legal way down to Texas. Then they were imported to other animal merchants, and all this was mixed up with prairie dogs. And then we got our outbreak with 72 cases. And these are the type of lesions you can get. So normally this has been extinguished. That is, since 2003, we didn't have any concerns with this chickenpox. Then we have a group of viruses which can be a cause for a major concern. The first is chikungunya, which emerged in 52 and further, but I will return to it. And these are all the territories where spreading was described. There's a dark green here, and you can see France here. Now, what about the picture of all this? This is a rash, this is a high fever, neurological cases. In one case at Western Southern, and you have two types of cycles: the forest cycle affecting chimpanzee, monkeys, baboons, and an urban cycle, and the spread is carried out by other types. With the forest cycle, it's the Africanus type and others, and you can see the others for the urban cycle. This is what happened in the Réunion Island with the first wave and a second major wave, and then the management was rather complex because it was very intricate with rheumatology. Of course, this is a recommendation issued this year, starting from the chikungunya infection and showing the crossing with chronic inflammatory infection. So the second virus which are put together because of the vector, it's the dengue. Dengue, we have the same dichotomy, forest cycle and the urban cycle for man, and you have also the Africanus honorable pictures. If you look at the transmission area for dengue, it's almost the same as what I've shown you for chikungunya. If you look at what is happening close to us, you see we are very close. Spreading of dengue, where we see a large share in Italy, in Greece, even in the south of France. And if you look at the different types you can come across in symptomatic dengue, you have with or without hemorrhage and an hemorrhage one. So you can have patients that can end up in your ICU wards. So if you look at the incidence of dengue over time, you can see in the last 50 years, based on WHO, you can see the number of cases, 500,000 hemorrhagic, as well as the number of death cases. So you have to think about that. Start thinking about that. If you look at 2014, what's interesting, the last two lines, there were 4 cases of dengue in the PACA region in the south of France, and 7 cases of chikungunya around Montpellier, the city of Montpellier. So they used to be exotic cases, but you have to take them into account depending on where is your practice. Now, our previous speakers mentioned influenza. This is an interesting viral pathology, and this is a picture you're all familiar with. This is a Spanish influenza in 1918, affecting France twice. But there are 2 things I'd like to say about influenza. It is to anticipate the last 2 slides. That is that the important thing to say about the flu is that in any case we're going to be faced with it. We don't know when, and we don't know when it's going to occur. So the idea is not to know whether we're going to come across that, but when we're going to come across that. So if you look at the 77H1N1, you can also see the 1918 Spanish flu, then 68 years earlier, or 59 years back, you have another outbreak. So things are coming back, so you have to get prepared. So the problem is preparedness and how to respond. And the last one that came to us is flu, which was a combination of 4 items, 2 from pig origin, 1 from avian origin, 1 from human origin, and it gave us H1N1, with a number of cases difficult to assess, but modest mortality, 0.15 to 0.25%. But the seriousness spectrum was enriched by obesity, by metabolic conditions, and there was a shift due to age because of previous exposure. Now, with H5N1, I'm slightly less optimistic than Charles Edouard. If you look at H5N1, we have 600 cases, I agree with you, which results into severe pathology because of the virus adherence with alpha to 6 in the depth of lungs. But something has happened. If you look at what happened in 2008, you can't see that on the table, but look at the line for Egypt. And you can see that everywhere it's only a 1-digit thing. But in Egypt, there was a change in the virus with the emergence of a subtype with a closer affinity for human receptors. And you can see the number of cases until 2011 and mortality. So what is very interesting is to see that behind that we have the outbreak curve, and you can see Egypt in yellow. You can see what is happening with the number of cases in Egypt. You can see that what is coming out of this is the one strain which has a higher affinity for human receptors. This is a strain for the future. So this is H1N1, same one as Charles Edouard. There is a little of it everywhere. And then there are many others, H3N3, H2N2, which you find in Virginia, New York, and H7N9. And the interhuman spread is not very good. But we'll end up with coronavirus. SARS or SRAS was in 2002, 2003, and MERS, the Middle East one, was in 2012, 2013, and it's still a dynamic one. We should bear this in mind. And if you look at the curve for MERS, it is still being translated. This is the history of SARS or SRAS in July, at the end of the outbreak. And then you can see that for MERS, you have something starting on the 30th of June 2012 in Saudi Arabia, and you get this kind of curve. That is in 2012, 2013. You can see the number of cases in 2014. So it's something which is not over, but which is limited to a geographical region. But keep that in mind when people have back from traveling. So, and you can see the relationship with camels and transmission to humans. So this is Ebola. I've taken up the New England paper showing the history of the Ebola virus. If you look at this, generally speaking, ever since the first outbreaks were described, it started in 1976 with Zaire. You can see the number of cases, 318, 284 in the same year in Sudan. Next, in 95 in the Democratic Republic of Congo with 315 cases. And the most important outbreak we have now starting in Uganda was 425 cases. So now a new epidemics in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But now today, the one we are faced with have totally different numbers and figures. Now, the reservoir is not fully understood. It's true that it comes from bats, and in the animal reservoir. It's part of the picture. Then there is contamination or spreading to larger mammals, from bats to plants, which can be consumed, and possibility to be transmitted directly from plants to humans or from bats to mammals and to humans. So the cycle is relatively important. So the present outbreak has been described recently, started in March 2014, it's less than a year. This is the first paper that showed that something was happening. It was in Guinea. Now, this is where we stand today. This is the last WHO report with 8,500 death cases. The first good news is that it's decreasing. Now, presently, Guinea has presented the lowest figures since the 3rd of August 14. There hasn't been any cases confirmed in Liberia in the last 2 weeks. And it's going down in Sierra Leone, where the problem was a source of concern. So now, if you see the monitoring of contacts, we have from 89 to 99% contacts in 3 countries. So this is very reassuring, but you have the number of deaths with caretakers. Now this is on the right-hand side is Sierra Leone, so we're happy to see this curve going down this time. It's quite clear. So we can now see that the outbreak is going to be controlled. So this is the number of cases, so it's under control. But there are still cases emerging, so it's still going on. But these are the number of cases over the last 21 days. This was done yesterday. So the WHO response was highly structured, because you can see that the whole chain was taken into account. So what has been assessed in the 3 countries are the lab testing capacity, bedside capacity, how to trace contacts and burials, and also social mobilization, and how this was taken into account by the local population. So all these 5 parameters were being monitored almost weekly by the WHO, showing the development and mobilization taking place. There are 2 slides about treatment. It's mostly supportive therapy, treating associated infections, hydration. There are not so many specific treatments, either plasma from recently cured patients, and also antiviral. And brasidofovir, and the other one, which seems to have an activity efficacy. There are 2 vaccines which are being developed, with phase 2 and phase 3 to be started. The first is a GSK vaccine. The second one is by Newly Genetics and Merck. And you have 3 other vaccines at earlier stages, mostly in phase 1. And the last one is from the Department of Health in the Federation of Russia. And then ZMapp was mentioned. Remember that we have animal data on chimpanzees, which are quite impressive. But if you look at literature, in particular resuscitation literature, you can see that the most effective treatment with animal models can be used for man. But this has been assessed. So the last 4 slides is to put things in perspective. You can see that there are many viruses, some of them on our continent, others on neighboring continents, and something we should bear in mind all the time. The number of viruses has greatly increased, and thanks to molecular biology, we can identify these outbreaks, but they are with us and they're going to continue. And you have reservoirs, which are either wild reservoirs and also domestic animals. I'm not mentioning drug-resistant pathogens, but everything transmitted by vectors. So these are the 4 main ways of having virus emerging. And if you add to that the number of unexpected epidemics, 94 to 99, 1929. They have occurred, and they couldn't be expected. So this is something that is not going to stop. In 1956, and this is Air France network of routes, you can see 2 billion travelers, and you can easily travel around the world. So even if these pathologies are located in South America, North America, they can come to us in 8 to 10 hours. So have this in mind. The last 2 slides are these ones. If you're faced with an epidemic, you have an alert phase, a pandemic phase, and a transition phase. So the only time when you can work is the inter-pandemic phase. For the rest, you're managing emergency, or you're catching up with what wasn't done previously. So anything you can do, anything you can set up and generate in terms of an efficient response to emergency has to be thought about now that it's quite, because between the emergence, detection, control, and spreading, the leeway is very, very short. So even if it's particularly difficult to work on the basis of an assumption or something which is